Welcome back, radio entrepreneurs, listeners, and fans. I'm producer Lauren Davis. I'm excited to introduce you all to our third and final part of this eighth FBA family business panel discussion, transitioning the entrepreneurial family enterprise. In this third and final part of the Spring 2023 Family Business Panel, we will be covering topics related to, is there a role at the company for the parent post-transition? What does post-transition reality look like for the next generation, estate division planning, and many more items. If you have not yet seen parts 1 and 2 of the panel discussion, we recommend you head over to radioentrepreneurs.com or any of the many channels that we stream on to catch the first 2 segments. All of these discussions are intended to be highly relevant to family businesses, but also applicable for entrepreneurs of all types. So be sure to follow Radio Entrepreneurs on LinkedIn, YouTube, Facebook, Spotify, or any of our other streaming platforms. Next, I will introduce our 4 panelists and our moderator once again for this discussion. For full introductions, please refer back to episode 1 linked below in this video description. We're joined today by Stephen Wilchins and Rich Hirschen, and our guests, Kristen, Burke, and Reed Dickinson. Welcome back all. And last but not least, a man who needs no introduction, but still gets one, Radio Entrepreneurs host and CEO of Mage, JDavis. Welcome, Jeffrey. We'll now
Thank
hand
you.
the
I don't know what this
conversation
I don't
over.
need an introduction is all about. I don't, it could
You'd
be
like
that
one though, right?
I might not have earned it, so who knows? I've heard from many clients about the imposter syndrome from clients over the years. So, I just hope that's not the case in this position. But again, I want to thank 15 years of Family Business Association, all the families that have been associated and supported us, and to our current corporate sponsors, to the Family Business Association, which you can find on our website, which we like. And we have a new website. It's just about ready to be released. I think everybody's going to find that quite exciting. I'm going to change my first question because that's my prerogative. This is something I have had to look at many times and talk to many families about. Is there a particular point of time when the next generation needs to consider being fired, or let's say a family member in general, even that person should be fired, a next generation should be fired, or maybe even a parent should be fired from a business? How do you address that and look at that thing? And just to let you know that when I was being trained by my father, he told me that his father retired, and when he got dementia, he started showing up at work again, barking orders to people using the names from people 40 years earlier. And he warned me about it because he was warning me about himself, that where I might have to make a decision about his incompetence at some particular point in time, and I should not feel guilty. So let me open that up, and then it's all up for grabs. Any person, how do you deal with that? There's a lot of emotion in there.
I'll start then. I think the first thing is you should have annual reviews. Just because you're family members doesn't mean that you shouldn't be reviewed by you should be reviewed by non-family members to the extent your organizational structure allows for that. But it's important for the family members to get objective advice and understanding of how they're doing so they can improve their skills within the company. So that would be the start of whether they would get fired or not down the road.
I think, Steve, we've talked about this before, but so I guess the answer to the question is, should someone be fired? I think if it's for a cause and the person's not performing, then yeah, just because you're in the family doesn't give you this right to work there in perpetuity, whether you're doing a good job or not. But one of the things I've seen is having some kind of a board of advisors comprised of some outsiders, the family business, so people that can, help you make these decisions and be there, someone who's independent of the family and can advise in these things. And I think in these kinds of situations, that's really helpful for the family members to also feel rely on the expertise of someone outside of the family to help make those decisions. So it doesn't feel like you're doing it out of spite or you want to get the previous generation out of there or something like that.
Good advice. Reed, Kristen, do you have opinions about this?
I agree. I think as many people outside of the family helping evaluate that process and it being performance and trying to make it as least personal as possible. It's nearly impossible to do, but trying to generate a system in which you're being evaluated. I think it's good regardless to constantly be getting feedback, which I think sometimes lacks in family businesses.
Yeah, and I agree too. I mean, I think the business becomes at some point, depending how big it gets, it becomes bigger than the family. And you have to always look at the business, because the business is supporting a lot of employees, customers, vendors. And so if there's a family member that's not really working out, I mean, you should go through the same process that you would with any employee of the company, and give them warnings, sit down with them, try to correct the problem, maybe change them to into a different role in the company. But the company becomes its own organism, and the family becomes just a little part of that organism. Maybe it's the heart or the brain, or just a few cells.
Very important.
I'm going to move on to another question, which tends to generate a lot of conflict within families. What's the best way to deal with compensation, unequal compensation, personal compensation? I know a lot of family members like to call me and tell me that they're going to set their own compensation and tell me their own self-worth. And I always think to myself, now we're going to go, now we got a real problem I got to deal with. And everyone's going to have to deal with this self-assessment, self-compensation committee. So I know Steve, Rich, we've all dealt with this. Reed, you probably had to deal with this. You had siblings. Kristen, you're going to deal with this at some level. So thoughts?
I mean, I think people should be paid for the value they're bringing to the business. And, you should get just because, and I've seen a business where you have various family members in there and they all decided they should get paid the same, and it didn't work. Some people had a lot more responsibility. It caused problems. So I think the pay should be commensurate with the responsibilities you have at the company. And you can do salary surveys and get, outside information on what those numbers should be. But I think that should be the approach.
Yeah, I agree with Rich. The salary should be commensurate with the role that you're playing in the company. We were big fans of performance-based, even in departments, not just for Salesforce, but departments. And my compensation was tied, so it was a lower salary but a higher bonus for making the company run well and making money. So, and you can, if you have different departments, you have different departments' profitability of that department. Bonus can go to the manager and the key people in that department, and maybe even to the people who do the everyday jobs in that department too. So it becomes like a team. That's my feeling.
I think that Rich's sorry, you go, Steve.
Oh, it's not only the compensation though, it's not only direct compensation, but you have equity, phantom equity, but also the roles. To the extent you're performing, your role should be different, and your role should have more responsibility. Same thing with the trustee. If you go, related to the business, if there's an asset that leases to the business, what's your role? If you're not responding properly, you're not performing, should you play that role as well? I mean, so it's a snowball effect of all the issues, not only compensation, but everything else that's impacting the business and impacting the family members that generate distributions or salary from the company should be looked at.
Right. I'll just add that I think Rich said before, I think this is an area that a board or a board of advisors has to play an active role, compensation committee. I do know that one company I was involved with once, we created a compensation committee, and we did a salary review, and that was enough for many family members to want us to be fired because they'd never seen the proper compensation. But I also think a lot of these families don't understand the difference between shareholder money and employee compensation. And people need to be educated to those different structures ahead of time. And Steve, you're very well aware of that. There are different ways to make money, and you should be paid as an employee. And I think that's important as well. So again, professional standards that come from industry are important in a family business.
You know, and it's not it's not unheard of if the CEO is successful in driving the company, that they should get a substantial amount of salary and bonus, way different than other family members. Just because other family members are in the business doesn't mean they should be getting a reasonably close compensation. And that's something that should be reviewed. And Rich's point with the independent board of advisors would be very helpful and productive.
Yep, I agree totally. Okay, both of you, Kristen and Reed, you're in different stages of family evolution. And, you know, currently a wish list, or maybe in terms of hindsight, how best do you think it should be trained or structured for a parent to nurture a family member? You know, in hindsight, Reed, what's the best way you could have been nurtured? Kristen, you have a wish list. How would you love to be nurtured versus how maybe you are or aren't? Who wants to address that first?
Sure, I can take it. I think you know, from a nurturing standpoint, more of sitting down as an equal, listening. You know, the parent should be an advisor, especially when you're taking over a bigger role, and kind of letting the sibling make mistakes, but also reviewing those mistakes. I think it's a lot of it comes out of communicating, and nurturing that child so that they, you know, and allow them to make mistakes, become a chief advisor when asked.
Good. Kristen, who has a great relationship with her father.
Yeah, I think you nailed it when you said communication. I'm beating the drum of relentless communication. It's critical, and it's something personally my family lacks. Communication's always been a struggle. So, you know, constantly getting feedback and understanding what they're doing, how they look at something for perspective, like getting their perspective, but not being forced to use their perspective. You know, using it as an educational tool, to your point, when called on. Yeah, but to me, communication is the most critical part, both from an education standpoint and both for a relationship standpoint when going through that transition.
Rich, Steve, do you want to add anything before we go on to the next question? No.
No.
You know, I'm going to go back to the sibling issue or family issue. Is it healthy in a family business to have family members competing with each other? And how can that be done productively? Reed, you had an older brother, which has its complications. Kristen, you have your parents' generation still in the business, and would be kind of unusual for you to be doing that. So I think it's an interesting question because it's still a business and it's all about productivity.
Yeah, I think it depends on whether the other siblings want to be competitive, you know, are competitive. If they're not competitive, then there's no competition. That are competitive in order to have a competition. And if the other siblings are just kind of going along for the ride and collecting their paychecks, where one sibling is really, you know, has a desire to kind of grow things and be there, then there's no competition. But I think if you have two siblings that want to compete in a healthy way, and it's through the business, not personally, then it can actually help to, you know, grow ideas and come up with new solutions for the company.
I'm not so sure children have the ability to say want to compete. Many times you're thrust in a position when there's 2 or 3 siblings in a business, and it's the results of where they are and what positions they're playing and what roles will will formulate whether, you know, there's competition just simply by how the things operates and how they perform. Okay, so whether they want to compete or not is another issue. It will depend how high they climb, but they're going to be forced into competing with each other in some way.
I'll just add to that, and I'll take from previously that I think it's very important not to compete with each other so that they don't feel they lose or win against their siblings. But I think by position, there should be substantial standards per position. And with milestones, as Kristen said, with deliverables that other people have said, and an appropriate compensation or bonuses for doing that. But I get worried about winning and losing within the family, that can be a problem. And so you have to kind of make them, you know, success competitive, but not with each other as much.
I think it's like a professional competition in a way. Like there needs to be some guardrails at it where if you've got two people that are just going at it hardcore, I think it can do be a lot more destructive than good for the company. But competition at the same time can breed new ideas and really be good for the company. So I think it just needs to be in the right perspective. Some competition's good, but there needs to be some guardrails on it that if it's getting out of control, someone needs to step in and get them to tone it down.
Right, guardrails, but also a nurturing environment with, you know, the parent or the older generation needs to provide guidance to the younger generation individually and connect with each one individually and allow them to blossom the way they can and determine whether they can succeed with their own existing qualities as well as within the company themselves. But if there's a nurturing environment and an environment where the older generation is willing to accept some mistakes as long as financially it doesn't hurt the company substantially, I think it's a good environment to have.
Well, I'm going to try to rush this along and shoot out one question in a rocket round because we're sort of run out of time. Do you feel that there's a role for the parent, mother, father in the transition after they've exited the business?
If there's a role?
Yes.
There's always a role.
Yeah.
I think so.
Kristen's agreeing.
Chief advisor when asked.
That's true. That's something I've had to deal with.
That's what the role should be. But you know, the parent has a lot more experience and history, so it's good to listen to the older generation.
Yeah, I think the next generation shouldn't discount the experience that other generation has in running a company for many years. And so I think it'd be a mistake to just say, hey, I don't need that and make that go away. I think, you know, like Reed said, you need to keep it in the right place, but I think it's great to have that there.
I think so too. You know, 3 segments, all done. Here's our producer, Lauren Davis. Lauren, I'm turning it over to you.
Thank you, everyone. What an important conversation for our multi-generational family businesses. That wraps up the last segment of our spring 2023 edition of this FBA Family Business Panel discussion, Transitioning the Entrepreneurial Family Enterprise. Thank you to all our listeners and viewers who have tuned into this panel. Thank you to our panelists and our guests and our moderator. Links will be provided in the video's description below to parts 1 and 2 if you didn't already hear them. Be sure to check those out and click subscribe just below the video if you're on YouTube, or follow if you're on one of our podcast platforms to make sure you stay up to date on all of our postings as they go live. If you're a fan of our videos, please be sure to like, comment, share, and subscribe, and press that bell button. Radio Entrepreneurs is also active on LinkedIn, so be sure to go follow our page there as well for more business advice and discussions. Until next time, goodbye. Thank you for listening. We'll be back with more stories on Radio Entrepreneurs.